Bone Part 2. Bone Part 2 by Tavi Dromio. What do you mean the story gets more appalling? Guraz was incredulous. How in Boethiah's name could it get more appalling? Well, you calling Boethiah's name. It's a ruse, Zamara scoffed, ordering 2 more mugs of grief and a glass of Flynn for Guraz. How much worse can a tale get which prominently features cannibalism, abuse of slaves, and regular placement of rotting animal carcasses? Don't you dare me, growled Haligerd, annoyed by his listener's lack of appreciation of his prose styling. Remind me where we were. Arslik-un is the owner of a stronghold under siege by savage cannibalistic Nords, said Zamara, keeping a straight face. After a lot of deaths and several unsuccessful attempts to get water, he had his armorer with the unlikely name of Gorkith outfit his slaves with the first ever bone mold armor. One of them finally makes it back with some water. It was only 1 jar of water, said Haligerd, pulling back his chair and continuing the tale, and Arslik-un drank most of it. Snowball knew that. Passing the remains to his dear armorer Gorkith, and the last dribbles to a few dozen slaves who still lived. It was hardly enough to sustain health and well-being. Another expedition was necessary, but they had only 1 suit of bone mold left, as there was only 1 survivor of the trip. Out of the 18 slaves made it through the gauntlet of Nords wearing that marvelous bone mold armor of yours, said Arslik-un to Gorath, and 1 can only carry back enough water for 1. Therefore, mathematically, as we have counted you and me, 56 remaining people at the stronghold, we need armor for 54 people. Since we already have 1, you only need to make 53 to make that total. That way, 3 will make it back with enough water for you and me, and whoever is the best condition to partake. I don't know what we'll do after that, but if we wait, we won't have enough slaves to fetch even a couple days' worth of water. I understand, whimpered Gorkith, but how am I going to make the armor? I used all the livestock bones to make the first batch of bone mold. Arslik-un gave an order which Gorkath fearfully complied with in 18 hours. What do you mean, Arslik-un gave an order which Gorkath fearfully complied with? Asked Zamara. What was the order? All will be clear, smiled Haligerd. I have to choose what to reveal and what to conceal. Such is the way of the tale-teller. I am the tale-teller. In 18 hours, Gorkith had 53 suits of bone mold, said Haligerd, continuing, not really minding the interruption, prepared for the slaves. Without prompting, he ordered the slaves to practice using the armor. Maybe you should make some weapons too. And even allowed them more training time than their predecessors. They not only learned how to move and stop quickly in the bone mold, but how to adjust their peripheral vision to see a blow before it came, and to sway to dodge, and where the sturdiest reinforcement points on the arm were, the center of the chest and the abdomen, and how to position themselves to take blows there. Against their natural instincts, the slaves even had time for a mock battle before being sent out among the cannibals. The slaves handled themselves admirably. Very few, just 15 slaves, were killed and eaten outright. Only 10 were killed and eaten when they reached the river. That was when things did not go according to Arslik-un's plans. 21 slaves with jars of water took off for the hills. Only 8 returned to the castle, largely because they were blocked by the cannibal Nords. It was a larger percentage than he had anticipated surviving, but Arslik Un felt righteous indignation at the paucity of loyalty. "Are you absolutely certain you wouldn't rather flee?" he hollered from the battlements. Finally, he allowed the survivors in. 3 had been killed waiting for the gate to open. 2 more died almost upon stepping into the courtyard. 1 was delirious, walking around in circles, laughing and dancing before suddenly collapsing. That meant 5 jars of water for 4 people. The 2 surviving slaves, Arslik Un and Gorkath. As the lord of the manor, Arslik Un took the extra jar, but he was democratic with the others. "You're quite correct," frowned Garaz. "This story is getting more and more appalling." "Just wait," smiled Helgerd. The next morning, Helgerd continued, Arslik Un awoke to a perfectly still and quiet stronghold. There was no murmuring in the corridors, no sound of hard labor in the courtyard. He dressed and surveyed the scene. It appears that the fortress was utterly deserted. Arslik Un walked down to the armorer's quarters, but the door was locked. "Open up," said Arslik Un patiently. "We need to speak." 30 out of 54 slaves successfully made it to the river and gathered water. Admittedly, some then fled, and a couple didn't survive, because I need to correct their fickleness. But mathematically, that's a 55% survival rate. If you and I and the 2 remaining slaves made the next river one, we too should survive. "Zalan and Galeo left last night with their armor," cried Gorkith through the door. "Who are Zalan and Galeo?" "The 2 remaining slaves. They don't remain anymore." "Well, that's vexing," said Arslik Un. "Still, we must continue on, mathematically." "I heard something last night," whimpered Gorkith in a funny voice, "like footsteps, only different, and they were moving through the walls. And there were voices, too. They sounded strange, like they couldn't move their jaws very well. But I knew one." Arslik Un sighed, humoring his poor armorer. "And who was it?" "Ponik." "And who is Ponik?" "One of the slaves that died when the Nords poisoned our water. One of many slaves that died and we made use of. He was always a nice, uncomplaining fellow, and that's why I noticed his voice above all others." Gorkith began to sob. "I understand what he was saying." "Which was what?" asked Arslik Un with a sigh. "Give me back my bones," Gorkith's voice shrieked. There was silence for a moment, and then more hysterical sobbing. "I saw that coming," laughed Zamara. "There was nothing more to be done with the armorer for the time being," said Helgerd, a trifle annoyed at the regular interruption. "So Arslik Un stripped one of the dead slaves of his suit of bone mold and put it on. He practiced in the courtyard, impressing himself with the natural comfortability with medium weight armor. For hours he boxed, feinted, dodged, sprint, skipped, jumped, and generally cavorted about. When he felt tired, he retired to the shade and took a nap. The sound of the king's trumpet woke him with a start. Night had fallen, and for a moment he thought he had been dreaming. Then the alarum sounded again, far in the distance, but clear. Arslik Un leapt to his feet and ran to the ramparts. Several miles away he could see the emissaries and their vast and well-armored escort approach. They were there early. The cannibal Nords below looked at one another with consternation. Savages they might be, but they knew when a superior force was approaching. Arslik joyously dashed down the stairs to Gorkith's chamber. The door was still locked. He beat on it, cajoling, demanding, threatening. Finally, he found a key, one of the few scraps of metal that had not been smelted days before. Gorkith appeared to be sleeping, but as Arslik approached, he noticed the armorer's mouth and eyes were wide open, and his arms were folded unnaturally behind his back. On closer inspection, the armorer was obviously dead. What was more, his face and whole body were sunken like an empty pig's bladder. Something moved through the walls like a footfall, only squishy. Arslik expertly and gracefully turned to face it, completely in balance. At first it seemed like nothing more than a bubble expanding through one of the cracks in the stone. As more of the flesh-colored gelatinous matter emerged, it more clearly resembled part of a face. A flaccid, almost shapeless face with a low brow and a slack, toothless jaw. The rest of the body oozed through the crack, a soft bag of muscle and blood. Excuse me. Behind Arslik and to the side, there was more movement, more slaves welling up through the cracks in the stone. They were all around him, reaching out. "Give us," moaned Punnik, his tongue rolling about his hanging jaw. "Give us back our bones." Arslik began to rip off his bone mold, throwing it to the floor. 100 figures more pooled into the small chamber. "That's not enough." The cannibals had cleared away by the time the king's emissary arrived at Arslik gate. They had not been looking forward to this visit. It was best, they thought philosophically, to begin with the worst of the king's noblemen. So to end their trip well, they sounded the alarm once again, but the gates did not open. There was no sound from Arslik stronghold. It took a few hours to gain access. If the emissaries had not brought a professional acrobat with them for entertainment, it might have taken longer. The place seemed to be abandoned. They searched every room until finally they came to the armorer's. There they found the master of the manor, folded neatly, legs behind his head, arms behind the legs, like a fine gown, not a bone in his body. "The first part of your story was complete nonsense," cried Samara, "but now it doesn't hold true on any level. How could bone mold be made again if the armorer who invented it died before he could tell anyone how he did it?" "I said that this was the first time it was created, not the first time people learned the craft." "And when did someone first teach someone else the craft?" asked Garaz. "That, my friends," replied Heligerd with a sinister smile, "is a tale for another night." Have a good day. Bye-bye. Give me back